All right, last video for this week, not so bad, but let's get into some bioenergetics. So we're going to talk about what that even means. We're going to look at some of the different types of chemical reactions that we see in biology. We're going to explain endergonic and exergonic reactions, talk about what a calorie is and how we use it to measure energy stored in molecules. We'll get into the terms of reduction reaction and oxidation reaction, so redox. We'll talk about coupled reactions and redox reactions, and then talk about hydrogen carrier molecules like NAD and FAD and what they do and how they work, and then get into some terms that some should be review. We've talked about some of these in the last unit. They're coming back, and others that are new. So metabolism, anabolism, catabolism, and dehydration, synthesis, hydrolysis reactions, as well as the endergonic and exergonic reactions, and kind of link these things together, right? Because a lot of these terms can link together. So bioenergetics, what does this even mean? Right? It sounds fancy, but basically it's just how does energy flow through living systems, right? And bioenergetics is bound by the laws of thermodynamics, right? We're bound by the laws of chemistry and physics. And so let's remind ourselves, or at least teach ourselves what the first couple laws of thermodynamics are. So the first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. We just transform it from one form to another. Right? All of the energy that exists already. We're not making anything new. We're just taking it and converting it from one form to another, like from chemical energy to heat energy. Right? There's nothing lost there. There's nothing destroyed there. It's simply converted. Now, we can't utilize every form of energy as efficiently. So when we say like we lose energy, again, we're not saying it gets destroyed. We're just saying it's in a form we can no longer kind of capitalize on. The second law of thermodynamics is that energy is lost with each transformation as heat. So basically, some energy with every transformation will be converted into the form of heat, and we can't utilize that, right? So the available free energy to do the work we need to do decreases every single time. Again, it's not getting destroyed, but it's transforming into heat, which we cannot necessarily utilize the same way we can use chemical energy. We're also constantly fighting against the concept of entropy. Entropy is disorganization. As entropy increases, disorganization increases. And so entropy increases with each step of energy transformation as well. We are constantly fighting against entropy as living systems. And we can see like when someone passes away, right, entropy kind of takes over, and that things start to break down and degrade and become less organized than they were before. And we're going to talk about how this relates to endergonic and exergonic reactions. So let's talk about some key types of chemical reactions. We have the synthesis, or the dehydration synthesis, where we have A, we want to add B to it to get AB. This is anabolic because we are building something up. This is going to require the input of energy. And then decomposition, which is hydrolysis for us. We have AB, we want to break it down to A plus B. This is catabolic because we are breaking something down. This usually releases energy. So anabolic, we need the input of energy to build something up, to synthesize something new from smaller parts. Catabolic, we're releasing energy as we break something from a larger form down to smaller units. We can have a single replacement where we have AB, when we want to add C to it, or we have C added to the mix, we just swap B and C, so we get AC plus B. Or a double replacement. AB and CD come together to form AC and BD. Now, we'll talk about, we mentioned on the right here, this can be a redox reaction, but we will talk about that in just a second. Right now, we just want to kind of make the link between the synthesis and anabolic terms, as well as the decomposition / hydrolysis and catabolic terms. So let's talk about endergonic reactions. Energy enters. We need an input of energy. So these, we have to get energy pulled in because the products contain more free energy than the reactants. So there's more energy contained within the bonds of the products than there are within the reactants. right? This is because the reactants have less entropy and the products have more entropy. So synthesis, this is going to require a synthesis reaction in a lot of cases because we need the input of energy, right? So for example, right, we're making glycogen from glucose monomers, right? We're going to need an input of energy to link the glucose monomers together. The glycogen will have more energy stored between the bonds within itself than the individual glucose monomers. That energy has to come from somewhere, in this case ATP. So endergonic reactions they have to get an input of energy. Whereas exergonic reactions, energy exits. Usually we're talking about breaking something down and releasing the energy found within the bonds of our reactants. Right? So the reactants have greater entropy, the products have reduced entropy. So the big thing is that energy exits, right? And that's the things that I really want you to remember more than anything is endergonic and exergonic in terms of where is energy going? Do we need an input of energy or are we getting a release of energy? Endergonic needs an input, exergonic creates a release. Now, the amount of energy in a molecule can be measured in a term called the calorie. 1 calorie is how much heat is required to raise the temperature of a cubic centimeter of water by 1 degree Celsius. Now, when we see calories in food, we're actually talking about kilocalories. So there is a difference between calorie with a little c and calorie with a big C. The calories that you're used to in terms of looking at like what's on your food are reported in kilocalories. But basically, it's the same concept, just a different scale in that how much energy is required to heat up that amount of water by 1 degree Celsius. So the energy from food that are stored away in our bodies, like the glycogen and fats we have, these get broken down in exergonic reactions. So we break them down to release energy to drive an endergonic reaction. So we see them kind of paired together. They're coupled, right? One exergonic reaction is used to release energy that can be utilized by the endergonic one. And usually what we're looking at is the energy from the catabolism of something like glycogen or fat or glucose or whatever is used to drive the endergonic process of producing ATP. So, and the reason why is like ATP has a lot of energy stored in those phosphate bonds, in that triphosphate like little chain, but producing that ATP is endergonic. We have to shove a lot of energy into that because ATP will not spontaneously generate. It is not a very stable molecule. It has a lot of energy. I mean, these are high energy bonds in the triphosphate like chain. And so we have to have an exergonic catabolic reaction drive the production of ATP. So these coupled reactions, right, most of the time in biology, they're going to be found in the form of what we call a redox reaction. Redox reactions involve a reduction reaction and an oxidation reaction. So basically, a reduction reaction is when an atom or molecule gains electrons because the charge has been reduced, it's become more negative. And an oxidation reaction, we've lost electrons, right? Oxygen does not need to be present for an oxidation reaction. Oxidizing is an action, not an item. So we've lost electrons, we've become more positively charged, right? It might be helpful to remember oil rig. So oxidation is losing electrons. Reduction is gaining. That's kind of what it stands for. That might help you remember. But a lot of times, again, these are paired in what we call a redox reaction. One molecule is going to lose an electron, another is going to receive it. The reducing agent is the electron donor because it's going to reduce something else. The oxidizing agent receives the electron. It is being oxidized. Or it is doing the oxidizing of the other item, of the other molecule. Now, usually what we're saying with these electrons, they're not just passing a free electron just by itself. We're carrying a hydrogen. We're using a hydrogen atom to carry it for us. So the molecule that loses the hydrogen is oxidized. The molecule that gains the hydrogen is reduced because that hydrogen is carrying the electron with it. And this leads us to some very important molecules called hydrogen carriers, or sometimes also called electron carriers, which is probably how you've heard about it before. So NAD and FAD are fantastic examples of this when we look at things like cellular respiration. But NAD and FAD basically is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, right? It can basically receive that that proton, so that hydrogen, as well as the extra electron. So hydrogen has a proton and electron, and then one more electron thrown on top. And so that can basically be used to shuttle electrons around. Same with FAD, flavin adenine dinucleotide, same process. We'll see these guys come back when we talk about cellular respiration, which is why we're introducing them now. And the cool thing is we can go back and forth between these. So NAD can be the oxidizing agent because it becomes reduced, it receives the electrons. We use it to shuttle an electron somewhere else. We leave the electron behind, right? So we are the reducing agent because we've given the electron away. We become oxidized and back to the start. So both of these, NAD and FAD, are fantastic at shuttling electrons around, which we'll talk about when we get to cell respiration and the electron transport chain. Now, there are many different processes, a lot of different pathways, and the sum of all these pathways, all these chemical pathways, is called metabolism. So the metabolic processes, right, are all the chemical reactions from all these major pathways that are usually linked together. Now, a metabolic pathway is like one section, right? One pathway in the entirety that houses a series of chemical reactions. So like we start with step one and we have to go through many steps to get to the end. That would be the entirety of that would be the metabolic pathway. Usually with a series of enzymes, right, that can help get us from point A to point B to point C to point D, right, and all the way through. Any of these enzymes, right, there are plenty of locations then, that means, where things can go wrong, where something can be mutated, something can be damaged, that results in what we call a metabolic disease. So here's just a few different pathways we see in kind of the picture, just demonstrating, just kind of illustrating how interwoven things are together. So again, metabolism, all of the reactions, all the chemical processes in the body, including the anabolic ones, where we build something up by utilizing energy and bringing energy in, and the catabolic ones, where we break something down to release energy through exergonic reactions. Right, so we're constantly undergoing, and we're constantly going through anabolic and catabolic reactions back and forth to maintain normal physiological function and survival, right? We can't just have one of these going on and not the other. And so that brings us back to the dehydration, synthesis, and hydrolysis reactions we talked about last time, right? So what do these look like, right? We have dehydration, synthesis reactions are used to build something up that's bigger, like proteins or nucleic acids, lipids, or polysaccharides. And then we can use hydrolysis reactions to take those bigger macromolecules and break them down into their individual subunits, like amino acids and nucleotides, free fatty acids, monosaccharides, right? And again, we just want to understand the relationship between dehydration, synthesis, and anabolism, and that this requires an energy investment. And hydrolysis or catabolism is going to be us drawing from our energy bank, right? We're making a withdrawal, we're getting energy to power something else. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but if you need to review this, you can pause here just to remind yourself of what a dehydration, synthesis, and a hydrolysis reactions are, right? Again, make the link between dehydration, synthesis, anabolism, and endergonic, as well as the relationship between hydrolysis, catabolism, and exergonic. Those three terms on each side are related to each other, right? There is a connection between dehydration, synthesis, anabolism, and endergonic, and there is a connection between hydrolysis, catabolism, and exergonic. Make sure that you recognize that,